How to avoid ambiguity in I am renting an apartment in New York? Does the sentence, I am renting an apartment in New York, imply that I am the landlord or the tenant? How can I unequivocally communicate that I am the tenant, or the landlord?
As a renter, I usually think of the tenant as renting, but the dictionaries seem to disagree with me as to primary use. If you are the landlord, you could say, I am renting out an apartment in New York. I have an apartment for rent in New York. I am letting an apartment in New York.
To unequivocally communicate that I am the tenant, or the landlord, among other things you could say one of the following. As tenant, I rent an apartment. As landlord, I rent an apartment. As previously noted by Choster, adding out to original sentence works for landlord sense. I am renting out an apartment in New York. You can state a not landlord case, and perhaps imply tenancy, via I pay for renting an apartment in New York.
Rent is indeed ambiguous that way. However, the two senses have different syntactic affordances. I rented a house in Ypsilanti. Ambiguous, subject equals tenant or owner, I rented a house in Ypsilanti from him. Unambiguous, subject equals tenant, I rented a house in Ypsilanti to him. Unambiguous, subject equals owner, I rented him a house in Ypsilanti. Unambiguous, subject equals owner, I rented out a house in Ypsilanti. Unambiguous, subject equals owner. And there's lots of other ways to disambiguate them. In context, one is rarely confused.
Tenant, I'm living in a rental apartment in New York. Landlord, I'm renting out an apartment in New York.
Unfortunately, the MW dictionary entry for rent as a verb shows two entries. 1. To grant the possession and enjoyment of in exchange for rent. 2. To take and hold under an agreement to pay rent. So the word officially can mean either. I know that I personally would assume that if you rent an apartment, then you are a tenant, but due to the ambiguity there's always room for doubt. But when in doubt, just add a clarification to your sentence. One example, I own an apartment for rent.
Field to the board barrel, please in the subscribing.